Hello, and welcome to History in Twilight. Tonight, we're traveling to a place Hollywood got completely wrong. Forget what you saw in the movie 300. Forget the monster king Xerxes dripping in gold chains. Forget the idea that Persia was some barbaric horde threatening civilization. The truth. Ancient Persia was the civilization. For over 2 centuries, it was the most advanced, most tolerant, and most brilliantly organized empire the world had ever seen. It invented the idea that different peoples could live together under one rule without losing their identity. It built roads that connected 3 continents. It created the first Declaration of Human Rights, carved in stone 2,500 years ago. This is the story of how a group of shepherds from the Iranian plateau became the masters of the known world. So before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to join me on these journeys through time. And I'm always curious, where in the world are you right now? And what time is it? Drop a comment below. I love knowing who's traveling through history with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, maybe pour some tea, and let us step back into a world of desert winds, mountain fortresses, and kings who believed that truth was the highest virtue. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Desert That Birthed an Empire. The story of Persia begins not in a palace, but in dust. Imagine, if you will, the Iranian plateau. It's a landscape that doesn't forgive weakness. Vast deserts stretch between mountain ranges that scrape the sky. The Zagros Mountains rise like a wall of stone in the west. The Olborz chain guards the north. Between them lies a high, windswept plateau where summer burns and winter freezes. This was not the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. There were no great rivers flooding the land with rich silt every year. There were no endless plains of grain. Water was scarce. The soil was thin. Survival here required something special: resilience, cunning, and an ability to adapt. And yet, it was precisely this harsh land that forged one of history's greatest civilizations. Around 1500 BCE, during the Late Bronze Age, waves of Indo-European peoples began migrating south from the steppes of Central Asia. These were the Aryans, though that word simply meant noble in their language. They were nomadic pastoralists, herders of sheep, goats, and horses. They moved with the seasons, following grass and water. 2 groups settled on the Iranian plateau. One was the Medes, who claimed the northern and western regions. The other was the Persians, who made their home in the south, in a region the Greeks would later call Persis. Today, we know it as Fars province, in modern Iran. Life for these early Persians was simple and hard. They lived in small tribal communities. They raised livestock. They hunted. They fought when they had to. Their religion, which would later evolve into Zoroastrianism, revered fire, truth, and the eternal struggle between light and darkness. They believed that lying was the greatest sin, and that a man's word was sacred. But they were not alone on this plateau. To the west lay the great empires of Mesopotamia. First came the Assyrians, brutal and efficient, who conquered with iron and terror. Their armies were legendary, their kings ruthless. The Assyrian Empire stretched from Egypt to the Persian Gulf, and it seemed unstoppable. But empires built on fear are always fragile. By the 7th century BCE, the Assyrians had made too many enemies. The Medes, those cousins of the Persians to the north, allied with the Babylonians. Together, in 612 BCE, they sacked Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. The city burned for weeks. The Assyrian Empire, which had terrorized the Near East for centuries, vanished almost overnight. In its place rose 2 powers. In Mesopotamia, the Neo-Babylonian Empire flourished under King Nebuchadnezzar, the man who would build the Hanging Gardens and destroy Jerusalem. And in the Iranian highlands, the Medes created their own kingdom. The Medes were now the overlords. The Persians, their southern neighbors and distant relatives, were their vassals. Persian chieftains paid tribute to the Median king in Ecbatana, a mountain capital that controlled the trade routes between east and west. For decades, this was the natural order. The Medes ruled. The Persians obeyed. But the Persians were watching. They were learning. They were waiting. and in the mid-6th century BCE, a boy was born in the ruling family of Persia. His name was Cyrus. His grandfather was Astyages, the king of the Maids. His father was Cambyses I, a Persian chieftain. This boy would change everything. The Persians had spent generations under the shadow of greater powers. They had survived the Assyrians. They had bent the knee to the Maids. But they had not forgotten who they were. They were a proud people, shaped by stone and wind, and they carried within them a quiet fire. That fire was about to become an inferno. Because the Persian Empire was not built by accident. It was not won through luck. It was forged by men who understood something their enemies did not, that loyalty earned is stronger than loyalty forced, that a king who listens is more powerful than a king who only commands, that the greatest conquests are not of land, but of hearts. And the first man to understand this completely was Cyrus. He was born into a world where empires rose and fell like dust storms. But he would create something different, something that would endure not just for decades, but for centuries. An empire that stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the borders of India. An empire so vast that the sun never set on its borders. But before he could become Cyrus the Great, he had to survive. The story goes that when he was born, his grandfather Astyages, the Median king, had a dream. He dreamed that vines grew from his daughter's womb and spread across all of Asia. His priests, the Magi, interpreted the dream as a prophecy. This child would one day overthrow him. So Astyages did what many fearful kings have done throughout history. He ordered the baby killed. He gave the task to his most trusted nobleman, a man named Harpagus. But Harpagus, whether out of pity or superstition, could not bring himself to murder an infant of royal blood. Instead, he gave the baby to a shepherd named Mithridates, instructing him to leave the child in the mountains to die of exposure. But the shepherd's wife had just lost her own child. When she saw the baby, she begged her husband to keep him. And so Cyrus, the prince who was supposed to die in the wilderness, was raised in the highlands among shepherds and herdsmen. It's a story almost too perfect. The future king of kings, raised not in a palace but in the wild, learning the skills of survival, leadership, and the loyalty of simple people. Whether the story is true or legend, we cannot know. But it tells us something important. The Persians wanted to believe their greatest king came from humble beginnings, that he understood the lives of common men because he had lived among them. By the time Cyrus reached manhood, he had returned to his father's court. He became the leader of the Persians, a subject king under his grandfather Astyages. But the young prince had no intention of remaining a vassal forever. The Median Empire was crumbling from within. Astyages was a weak and paranoid ruler. His cruelty had alienated his nobles. His campaigns had drained the treasury. And when Cyrus finally raised the banner of rebellion in 550 BCE, much of the Median army refused to fight him. The war was short. At the decisive battle, Median soldiers defected to Cyrus in the middle of the fighting. Astyages was captured, and just like that, the Median Empire ceased to exist. But here is where Cyrus revealed his genius. He did not execute his grandfather. He did not burn Ecbatana. He did not enslave the Medes or erase their culture. Instead, he declared that the Medes and Persians were now one people. He kept Median nobles in positions of power. He honored their customs. He even adopted some of their royal protocols. This was revolutionary. In the ancient world, conquest meant annihilation. The Assyrians had proven that. When they conquered a city, they impaled the survivors and scattered the population. It was terror as policy. Cyrus chose a different path. He understood that ruling by fear was expensive. It required constant military force. It bred endless rebellion. But ruling with respect, with tolerance, with a light hand that created loyalty, that turned enemies into allies. This was the beginning of the Persian way. An empire built not on the ashes of the conquered, but on their cooperation. And now, with the Medes under his banner, Cyrus turned his gaze outward. To the west lay the wealthy kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the famously rich king Croesus. To the east lay the vast deserts and mountains that led to India. And to the south lay the greatest prize of all, Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the richest and most ancient city in the world. The shepherd boy from the highlands had become a king. Now he would become a conqueror, but not the kind the world had seen before. Chapter 2. Cyrus the Great, the shepherd who became king. There are leaders who inherit power. There are leaders who seize it. And then there are leaders who, somehow, make power seem inevitable, as if the world itself had been waiting for them. Cyrus was the third kind. By 547 BCE, just 3 years after overthrowing his grandfather, Cyrus ruled an empire that stretched across the Iranian plateau. The Medes and Persians were unified, but that was only the beginning. The world around him was watching, waiting to see what this upstart king would do next. To the west lay Lydia, a powerful kingdom in what is now Turkey. Its king, Croesus, was a legend even in his own time. His wealth was so vast that his name became synonymous with riches. Even today, we say rich as Croesus. His capital, Sardis, glittered with gold. His treasury overflowed. He believed himself untouchable. But Croesus made a fatal mistake. He misread a prophecy. Worried about the rising power of Persia, Croesus consulted the oracle at Delphi, the most famous oracle in the Greek world. He asked whether he should go to war with Cyrus. The oracle replied, "If you cross the river Halys, you will destroy a great empire." Croesus took this as a sign of victory. He gathered his army, crossed the river, and invaded Persian territory. He was right about one thing. A great empire would be destroyed. His own. The war began in 547 BCE. At first, the Lydians held their ground. Croesus had cavalry, wealth, and Greek mercenaries. But Cyrus had something more valuable: adaptability. At the Battle of Thymbra, Cyrus faced the Lydian cavalry, the finest in the world. Instead of meeting them head-on, he did something unexpected. He placed camels at the front of his lines. Horses, it turns out, are terrified of camels. The smell, the sound, the strangeness of them, it panics horses completely. The Lydian cavalry broke in confusion. Their riders were thrown, and the Persian infantry moved in. Croesus fled back to Sardis and barricaded himself inside. He sent urgent messages to his allies in Greece, begging for help. But help never came. Cyrus laid siege to the city. Within 2 weeks, Sardis fell. Now, according to the customs of the time, Croesus should have been executed. He was a defeated king. He had started the war. He had lost. That was the end of the story. But Cyrus, once again, did the unexpected. He spared Croesus. Not only that, he made him an advisor. The Greek historians, particularly Herodotus, tell us that the two men became something like friends. Croesus, humbled and philosophical in defeat, offered Cyrus counsel, and Cyrus, pragmatic and curious, listened. This act of mercy sent shockwaves through the ancient world. Kings didn't do this. Mercy was weakness, or so everyone thought. But Cyrus understood something deeper. By sparing Croesus, he sent a message to every other king, every other city: surrender to me, and you will be treated with honor. Resist, and you may still be forgiven. It was psychological warfare of the highest order. With Lydia conquered, the Greek city-states of Ionia, along the Aegean coast, fell under Persian control without a fight. These wealthy trading cities simply opened their gates. Why resist when resistance seemed pointless and submission seemed safe? Cyrus now controlled the western approaches to Asia Minor. He controlled the trade routes. He controlled the gold mines of Lydia. The Persian Empire was no longer a regional power. It was becoming a superpower. But Cyrus was not finished. To the east lay the unconquered steppes of Central Asia, home to fierce nomadic tribes like the Massagetæ. To the south lay Babylon, the crown jewel of the ancient world. And it was to Babylon that Cyrus turned his ambition next. Babylon was ancient even by the standards of the 6th century BCE. It had stood for over 1,000 years. It was the city of Hammurabi, of the Hanging Gardens, of the Tower of Babel. Its walls were so thick that chariots could race along the top. Its temples touched the sky. Its Ishtar Gate, covered in blue-glazed bricks and golden lions, was one of the wonders of the world. But Babylon, for all its glory, was rotting from within. The king, Nabonidus, was more interested in archaeology and moon worship than in governing. He had alienated the powerful priesthood of Marduk, Babylon's chief god. He had left the city for years at a time, living in the Arabian desert, searching for ancient ruins. The people hated him. The priests hated him. Even his own son, Belshazzar, who ruled in his absence, could not hold the kingdom together. Cyrus saw the opportunity, but once again, he did not rely on brute force. He began a propaganda campaign. He sent messages into Babylon, declaring that he came not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He claimed that Marduk himself had chosen him to free Babylon from Nabonidus's misrule. He promised to restore the temples. He promised to honor the gods. It was brilliant. And it worked. In 539 BCE, Cyrus's army arrived at the gates of Babylon. According to ancient sources, the Persians diverted the Euphrates River, which flowed through the city. As the water level dropped, Persian soldiers waded through the river gates under cover of darkness. By the time the Babylonians realized what was happening, it was over. Cyrus entered the city without a battle. The people lined the streets, some say, throwing flowers. Nabonidus fled and was captured. And Cyrus, the shepherd king from the mountains of Persis, became the ruler of the greatest city in Mesopotamia. But what he did next changed the course of history. Most conquerors would have looted Babylon. They would have torn down its temples and melted its idols for gold. They would have enslaved its population and salted the earth. Cyrus did the opposite. He issued a decree, now known as the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay barrel covered in cuneiform script. In it, he proclaimed that all the peoples deported by the Babylonians could return to their homelands. He ordered the restoration of their temples. He promised religious freedom. He declared himself not a conqueror, but a rightful king chosen by Marduk. This decree freed the Jews, who had been living in exile in Babylon for decades, ever since Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed Jerusalem. Cyrus allowed them to return to Judea. He even funded the rebuilding of their temple. To the Jewish people, Cyrus was a Messiah. The book of Isaiah calls him the Anointed One. The book of Ezra praises him as a servant of God. No pagan king in history had ever been so honored by the Hebrew Bible. But Cyrus's genius was not religious. It was political. He understood that an empire built on tolerance was stronger than one built on force. He let conquered peoples keep their gods, their languages, their customs. He didn't try to make everyone Persian. He simply made them subjects of the Persian king. This was the foundation of the Achaemenid system: unity without uniformity, control without cruelty, strength through respect. It sounds almost modern. And in a way, it was. Cyrus anticipated ideas that wouldn't fully re-emerge until the Enlightenment, over 2,000 years later. By the end of his reign, the Persian Empire stretched from the Aegean Sea to the borders of India. It was the largest empire the world had ever seen, and it was ruled by a man who began life as a shepherd, survived an assassination attempt as a baby, and conquered half the known world without becoming a tyrant. But Cyrus was still human, and humans, even great ones, do not live forever. In 530 BCE, Cyrus marched east to confront the Massagetae, a nomadic tribe led by a warrior queen named Tomiris. The reasons for the campaign are unclear. Some say Cyrus sought to secure his eastern frontier. Others say he wanted one final conquest. Some ancient sources claim he proposed marriage to Tomiris, and she refused. Whatever the reason, it ended badly. The Persians won an early battle through trickery, capturing Tomiris's son, who took his own life in captivity. Enraged, the queen rallied her forces. In the battle that followed, the Persians were crushed, and Cyrus, the great king, fell in combat. According to legend, Tomiris had Cyrus's body brought to her. She filled a wineskin with blood and shoved his severed head into it, saying, "I warned you I would quench your thirst for blood, and so I shall." It was a brutal end for a man who had shown so much mercy to others. But even in death, Cyrus's legacy lived on. His body was brought back to Persis and laid to rest in a simple stone tomb in Pasargadae, his first capital. The tomb still stands today, modest and dignified, with an inscription that once read, "O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not begrudge me this small patch of earth that covers my body." Cyrus the Great had built an empire. But more than that, he had built an idea, the idea that power could be wielded with wisdom, that conquest did not require cruelty, that different peoples could live together, not in fear, but in peace. It was an idea that would define Persia for the next 2 centuries, and it would echo through history long after the empire itself had fallen. Chapter 3. The Conquest of Babylon. Victory without blood. In the autumn of 539 BCE, the greatest city in the world held its breath. Babylon. The name alone carried weight. For over 1,000 years, it had been the heart of Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. Its walls were so massive that ancient writers claimed a chariot pulled by 4 horses could turn around on top of them. The Ishtar Gate gleamed with blue-glazed bricks and golden bulls. The ziggurat of Marduk rose like a mountain of brick toward the heavens. The Hanging Gardens, if they truly existed, were counted among the wonders of the world. This was the city of Hammurabi, who had written laws in stone. The city of Nebuchadnezzar, who had crushed Jerusalem and brought the Israelites here in chains. It was old when Athens was young. It was powerful when Rome was still a village of shepherds. And now, a Persian army was at its gates. But the story of how Babylon fell is not a story of siege engines and battering rams. It is a story of propaganda, betrayal, and one man's understanding that sometimes the greatest victories are won before the first sword is drawn. The king of Babylon was named Nabonidus, and he was, by all accounts, a strange man. He was more interested in the past than the present. While his empire crumbled, he spent years in the Arabian desert, excavating ancient temples and worshipping the moon god Sin instead of Marduk, the patron deity of Babylon. This was not just eccentric, it was heresy. The priests of Marduk, the most powerful religious order in Babylon, were furious. The people, who depended on the king to perform sacred rituals, felt abandoned. Even Nabonidus's own son, Belshazzar, who ruled Babylon in his father's absence, could not repair the damage. The city was rich. Its granaries were full. Its walls were impregnable, but its soul was hollow. Cyrus understood this, and he moved not with armies first, but with words. Persian agents spread throughout Babylon, whispering in the marketplaces, in the temples, in the taverns. They said that Cyrus did not come as a destroyer, but as a liberator. They said that Marduk himself, angry at Nabonidus's neglect, had chosen the Persian king to restore order. They said that Cyrus honored the gods of all peoples, and that under his rule the temples would be filled again with offerings and hymns. It was a masterpiece of psychological warfare, and it worked. By the time Cyrus's army arrived, much of Babylon's elite had already decided not to resist. The priests wanted their power restored. The merchants wanted stability. The common people wanted a king who actually cared about Babylon. But still, the question remained, how do you take a city protected by walls that had never been breached? The answer, according to the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, was brilliantly simple. The Euphrates River flowed directly through the center of Babylon. The city's walls extended into the water, with gates of bronze that could be lowered to block the river in times of war. It seemed like perfect protection. Cyrus studied the problem, and then he ordered his engineers to dig. North of the city, the Persians diverted the Euphrates. They dug channels, redirecting the water into marshes and irrigation canals. Slowly, the river level inside Babylon began to drop. The Babylonians noticed, of course, but they didn't understand what was happening. Perhaps they thought it was a natural drought. Perhaps they thought the Persians were simply trying to cut off their water supply. They did not realize the true plan until it was too late. On the night of the Persian attack, during a great festival, when much of the city was drunk and distracted, the water level in the Euphrates had dropped to waist height. Persian soldiers waded silently through the river gates, which the Babylonians had left open, confident in the river's protection. By the time the alarm was raised, Persian troops were already inside the inner city. But here is the remarkable part. There was no massacre, no looting, no burning. The book of Daniel, in the Hebrew Bible, tells a vivid story of that night. King Belshazzar was holding a great feast, drinking wine from the golden vessels looted from the temple in Jerusalem. Suddenly, a disembodied hand appeared and wrote on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. The prophet Daniel interpreted it as a message from God. You have been weighed and found wanting. Your kingdom is given to the Medes and Persians. That very night, the Bible says, Belshazzar was killed. Whether the story is literal history or theological metaphor, the core truth remains. Babylon fell almost without a fight. And when Cyrus entered the city, he did so not as a conqueror, but as a liberator. He went directly to the temple of Marduk. He made offerings. He declared himself chosen by the god to restore order. He promised to repair the temples and resume the sacred festivals that Nabonidus had abandoned. And then he issued one of the most important decrees in ancient history. It is preserved today in the form of a clay cylinder, covered in cuneiform script, discovered by archaeologists in 1879. We call it the Cyrus cylinder, and many historians consider it the first declaration of human rights in recorded history. In it, Cyrus proclaims that all peoples who had been forcibly resettled by previous Babylonian kings were free to return to their homelands. He orders the restoration of their temples. He forbids forced labor. He declares that people should be allowed to worship their own gods in their own way. This was revolutionary. Empires did not do this. Conquest meant domination, slavery, cultural erasure. But Cyrus was creating a different kind of empire. One built on consent, or at least the appearance of it. The most famous beneficiaries of this decree were the Jewish people. Decades earlier, in 586 BCE, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed Jerusalem, burned Solomon's temple, and dragged the Jewish people into exile. They had lived in Babylon ever since, weeping by the rivers of Babylon, as the Psalms say, remembering Zion. Now, Cyrus gave them permission to go home. Not only that, he funded the rebuilding of their temple. He returned the sacred vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had stolen. To the Jewish people, this was nothing short of miraculous. The Hebrew Bible speaks of Cyrus with a reverence given to almost no other foreign ruler. The book of Isaiah calls him the Anointed One, a term usually reserved for Jewish kings. The book of Ezra records his decree in detail, praising him as an agent of God's will. Cyrus, a Zoroastrian Persian, became a hero in Jewish scripture. That alone tells you how extraordinary his actions were. But Cyrus's genius was not religious. It was practical. He understood that an empire is not held together by garrisons and fear. It is held together by loyalty, and loyalty is earned, not taken. By allowing peoples to keep their religions, their languages, their traditions, he turned potential rebels into grateful subjects. By honoring local gods, he made himself seem chosen, not foreign. By showing mercy, he made resistance seem pointless. It was soft power, centuries before anyone coined the term. Babylon became the administrative heart of the Persian Empire. Its wealth flowed into Cyrus's treasury. Its scribes and administrators became the backbone of Persian bureaucracy. And its fall, achieved almost without bloodshed, sent a message to every other kingdom in the Near East. Resistance was futile, but submission was dignified. Within a few years of conquering Babylon, Cyrus controlled an empire that stretched from the Aegean Sea to the Hindu Kush. He had defeated the Medes, the Lydians, and the Babylonians, three of the most powerful kingdoms of the age. And he had done it not just with swords, but with words, with mercy, with wisdom. The shepherd from the highlands had become the king of the world, and the world, for the most part, accepted it. Because Cyrus had proven something no conqueror before him had understood, that an empire built on respect could be stronger and last longer than one built on terror. Babylon did not burn, it thrived, and under Persian rule, it would remain one of the jewels of the ancient world for 2 more centuries. Chapter 4. The Royal Road and the Persian system. An empire is only as strong as the systems that hold it together. Cyrus had conquered half the known world. But conquest is easy compared to governance. How do you control an empire that stretches from the Mediterranean to Central Asia? How do you keep satraps, governors, and generals from declaring independence? How do you move armies, collect taxes, and send messages across thousands of miles of desert, mountain, and steppe? The answer was infrastructure. And the Persians, under Cyrus and his successors, became masters of it. At the heart of the system was the Royal Road, one of the greatest engineering projects of the ancient world. It ran for over 1,500 miles, from Sardis in western Anatolia to Susa in Persia. Along its length were over 100 stations, spaced about 15 miles apart, each equipped with fresh horses and supplies. A journey that would normally take 3 months could be completed by royal messengers in just 7 days. Herodotus, the Greek historian, marveled at it. He wrote, "Nothing mortal travels so fast as these Persian messengers. Neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night stays these couriers from the swift completion of their appointed rounds." Sound familiar? That line, slightly adapted, is inscribed on the main post office in New York City. The modern postal service owes a debt to the Persians, but the Royal Road was more than just a mail route. It was the bloodstream of the empire. Troops could be moved quickly to trouble spots. Trade goods flowed east and west, enriching cities along the way. And most importantly, information traveled fast. In an age before telegraphs or telephones, information was power. A king who knew what was happening in his provinces could respond before rebellions grew. A king who didn't know was already doomed. The Persians also created an administrative system that was, for its time, astonishingly efficient. The empire was divided into 20 provinces, called satrapies. Each was governed by a satrap, usually a Persian nobleman or a member of the royal family. The satrap had enormous power within his province. He collected taxes. He commanded local troops. He served as judge. He was, in many ways, a king in miniature. But the Persian king was no fool. He knew that giving men too much power was dangerous. So the Persians created a system of checks and balances. Each satrap was watched by a royal secretary, who reported directly to the king. A military commander, also appointed by the king, controlled the professional Persian troops in the province, separate from the satrap's local forces. And perhaps most famously, the king employed inspectors known as the eyes and ears of the king, who travelled in secret, investigating complaints and ensuring loyalty. No satrap could be sure who was watching. No satrap could feel entirely safe plotting rebellion. It was a system built on mutual suspicion, and it worked remarkably well. Taxes were standardized. Each province paid a fixed tribute in silver, calculated based on its wealth and population. Some provinces also paid in goods: grain from Babylon, horses from Media, ivory from India. The system was transparent and predictable, which made it more tolerable than the arbitrary looting of earlier empires. The Persians also introduced a standardized currency, the gold daric, named after Darius I. For the first time, merchants could trade across the empire using a single, trusted coin. This accelerated commerce and bound the empire together economically. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of the Persian system was its tolerance. The Persians did not try to make everyone Persian. They didn't impose their language, their religion, or their customs on conquered peoples. As long as you paid your taxes and didn't rebel, you were largely left alone. Local elites were kept in power. Local temples were funded. Local laws were respected, as long as they didn't contradict imperial authority. The Persians even employed local officials who could read and write in the languages of their regions: Aramaic in the west, Elamite in the south, Old Persian in the heartland. This was pragmatism at its finest. Why waste resources forcing people to change when you can simply let them be? And yet, for all this tolerance, the empire was still unmistakably Persian at its core. The great king, as the Persian monarch was called, was the supreme authority. He was not just a political leader, but a semi-divine figure, chosen by Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of Zoroastrianism, to bring order to the world. The king's word was law. To disobey him was not just treason, it was a violation of cosmic order. And the punishments were severe. Crucifixion, impalement, and being trampled by elephants were all recorded methods of execution for serious crimes. So the empire balanced carrot and stick, obey and prosper, rebel and be destroyed. At the center of this system, both literally and symbolically, was the royal capital. Under Cyrus, it was Pasargadae, a modest city in the Persian heartland. But as the empire grew, so did the need for a more impressive seat of power. That need would be answered by the next great Persian king. But even under Cyrus, the vision was clear. This was not just an empire of conquest. It was an empire of organization, of systems, of roads, and messengers and bureaucrats. It was the first true superpower, and its methods, its infrastructure, its administrative genius would become the model for every great empire that followed. From Alexander's Macedonian Empire, to Rome, to the Islamic caliphates, to the modern nation-state, the influence of the Persian system is everywhere. The Persians proved that you could rule the world not just with the sword, but with the stylus, the horse, and the well-maintained road. And that legacy, more than any battle, is why Persia matters. Chapter 5. Cambyses and the Egyptian Campaign. Cyrus the Great died, as he had lived, in battle, somewhere on the windswept steppes of Central Asia. His body was brought home and laid to rest in a simple tomb at Pasargadae. The empire mourned, but empires do not stop for grief. They move forward, or they collapse. The question now was, who would succeed him? Cyrus had two sons. The elder was named Cambyses, a man in his 30s, experienced in war and administration. The younger was Bardia, also called Smerdis by the Greeks, quieter and less known. According to tradition, Cyrus named Cambyses as his heir and gave him control of the empire. Bardia was made governor of the eastern provinces, a significant position, but not the throne. Cambyses II took power in 530 BCE, and immediately he faced the challenge every new king faces, proving himself. He had inherited the largest empire in the world. But inheritance is not the same as legitimacy. The satraps, the generals, the nobles, they all watched carefully. Was this new king strong? Was he wise? Could he hold what his father had won? Cambyses decided to answer that question with conquest, and he set his sights on the one great kingdom his father had not yet absorbed, Egypt. Egypt was ancient, wealthy, and proud. It had stood for 3,000 years. It was the land of the pyramids, of the Sphinx, of the Nile, which turned desert into paradise. Its pharaohs claimed to be gods. Its priests controlled vast temples filled with gold. Its armies, though not what they once were, still commanded respect. But Egypt, like Babylon before it, was weakening from within. The reigning pharaoh, Amasis, had managed to keep Egypt independent through diplomacy and alliances with the Greeks. But in 526 BCE, Amasis died. His son, Psamtik III, inherited the throne. Psamtik was young, inexperienced, and unlucky. Within months, Cambyses was at the border. The Persian army marched west across the Sinai Desert, a brutal, waterless wasteland. Supplying an army in the desert is nearly impossible. But Cambyses had made a deal with the Arab tribes who controlled the caravan routes. They provided water and guides. In exchange, they were left in peace. It was a lesson learned from his father. Diplomacy can be as valuable as swords. The two armies met at Pelusium, a fortress city on Egypt's eastern frontier, in 525 BCE. The battle was fierce. The Egyptians fought with the desperation of men defending their homeland. But the Persians had superior numbers, better organization, and the confidence of an army that had never known defeat. According to Herodotus, Cambyses used a clever psychological trick. Knowing that the Egyptians considered certain animals sacred, especially cats, he ordered his soldiers to carry cats and other sacred animals in front of their lines. The Egyptians, horrified at the thought of harming these creatures, hesitated. The Persians did not. Whether the story is true or not, the result was clear. Pelusium fell. The Egyptian army was shattered. Psamtik retreated to Memphis, the ancient capital, but it was only a matter of time. Memphis surrendered. Psamtik was captured, and Cambyses, the Persian king, became pharaoh of Egypt. At first, Cambyses tried to follow his father's example. He respected Egyptian customs. He made offerings at the temples. He even adopted some of the titles and rituals of the pharaohs. The priests, pragmatic as always, accepted him. Egypt was now part of the Persian Empire, and for a brief moment, it seemed like Cambyses would be remembered as a worthy successor to Cyrus. But then, something went wrong. The ancient sources disagree on what happened. Some say Cambyses went mad. Others say he was always cruel, and Egypt simply revealed it. Still others suggest that the sources, mostly Greek and Egyptian, were biased against him and exaggerated his crimes. What we do know is this. Cambyses launched 2 more campaigns, and both were disasters. First, he tried to invade Nubia, the kingdom to the south of Egypt, in what is now Sudan. The Persian army marched into the desert, but they ran out of supplies. Men began to starve. According to Herodotus, they resorted to cannibalism, drawing lots to see who would be eaten. The campaign was abandoned. Then, Cambyses ordered an expedition against the oasis of Siwa, home to the famous oracle of Amun, deep in the Libyan desert. He sent an army of 50,000 men. They marched into the desert and were never seen again. Some say they were buried by a sandstorm. No trace of them has ever been found. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, things were falling apart. Cambyses allegedly killed the sacred Apis bull, a living god to the Egyptians, mocking their religion. He married his own sister, which shocked even the Persians. He executed nobles on a whim. He grew paranoid and violent. Whether these stories are true or propaganda, the result was the same. Cambyses lost the loyalty of his people, and then came the final blow. Word reached him that his brother, Bardia, had seized the throne in Persia, claiming that Cambyses was unfit to rule. A rebellion was spreading. Satraps were defecting. The empire was on the brink of civil war. Cambyses immediately set out for Persia, desperate to reclaim his throne. But he never made it. In 522 BCE, somewhere in Syria, Cambyses died. The circumstances are murky. Some sources say he accidentally stabbed himself with his own sword while mounting his horse. Others whisper assassination. Still, others suggest suicide, the act of a man who knew he had lost everything. His body was brought back to Persia and buried with the honors of a king. But his reign, which had begun with such promise, ended in chaos, and the empire he left behind was leaderless, divided, and on the edge of collapse. The age of Cyrus was over. The age of Cambyses had been brief and troubled. Now, the empire needed a new leader, someone strong, someone ruthless, someone who could take the fractured pieces of Persia and forge them into something even greater than before. That man was waiting in the wings. His name was Darius, and he would not wait long. Chapter Shashi, Darius the administrator, the empire perfected. When Cambyses died in 522 BCE, the Persian Empire stood at a crossroads. It could fracture into warring provinces, as empires so often do when strong leaders die, or it could find someone capable of holding it together. What it found was Darius. Darius I, who had come to be known as Darius the Great, was not the obvious choice for king. He was not Cyrus's son. He was a distant cousin, a member of the royal family, but not in the direct line of succession. He was 38 years old, a general, an administrator, a man who had served loyally under both Cyrus and Cambyses. But when the throne became vacant, loyalty gave way to ambition. According to Darius's own account, carved into the side of a mountain at Behistun, the man who claimed to be Bardia, Cambyses' brother, was actually an impostor, a Magian priest named Gaumata who looked like Bardia and had seized power through deception. According to Darius, He and 6 other Persian nobles discovered the truth. They confronted the false king and killed him. Then, after some debate, they decided that Darius, as the oldest and most experienced among them, should become the new great king. It's a convenient story, and historians have debated for centuries whether it's true or simply propaganda to justify what was, essentially, a coup. But here's what matters. Within weeks of Cambyses' death, Darius held the throne. And immediately, the empire exploded into rebellion. 19 different uprisings broke out across the empire, from Babylon to Bactria, from Egypt to Elam. Satraps declared independence. Pretenders claimed royal blood. Old kingdoms tried to reassert themselves. It was as if the entire structure Cyrus had built was collapsing all at once. A lesser man would have been overwhelmed. Darius was not a lesser man. Over the course of one brutal year, from 522 to 521 BCE, Darius led his armies from one end of the empire to the other. He fought 19 battles. He crushed 19 rebellions. He executed the leaders, pardoned the followers, and reinstalled loyal governors. And then, to make sure no one ever doubted his legitimacy again, he did something extraordinary. High on a cliff face at Behistun, along the road between Babylon and Ecbatana, Darius ordered a massive inscription carved into the rock. It was written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian. It stood over 300 feet above the ground, visible for miles, impossible to deface. The inscription told the story of his rise to power. It listed every rebellion, every battle, every victory. It showed Darius standing victorious, his foot on the chest of Gaumata, the false king. And it declared, in no uncertain terms, that Darius ruled by the will of Ahura Mazda, the supreme god. This was propaganda on a monumental scale, but it was also something more. The Behistun inscription became the key that unlocked the ancient world. In the 19th century, scholars used it to decipher cuneiform, allowing us to read the languages of Babylon, Assyria, and Persia for the first time in 2,000 years. Darius had wanted to be remembered. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. But Darius was not content simply to hold the empire together. He wanted to perfect it, and so he set about reorganizing the entire structure of Persian governance with a level of detail and efficiency that bordered on obsessive. He standardized the tax system, making it more predictable and fair. Each of the 20 satrapies was assigned a fixed annual tribute, calculated based on agricultural output, population, and resources. This removed much of the arbitrary cruelty that had characterized earlier empires. He reformed the military, creating a standing professional army that was loyal to the king, not to individual generals. At its core was the Immortals, an elite unit of 10,000 soldiers, so named because whenever one fell, he was immediately replaced, keeping the number constant. He expanded the royal road and built new roads connecting every corner of the empire. He established a standardized system of weights and measures. He minted coins in gold and silver, the daric and the siglos, which became the international currency of the ancient world. He encouraged trade, protecting merchants and guaranteeing safe passage along imperial highways. Caravans moved from India to Greece, carrying silk, spices, precious stones, and ideas. And perhaps most remarkably, he codified the laws. Darius collected the legal traditions of all the conquered peoples, Egypt, Babylon, Elam, and created a unified legal code that respected local customs while establishing universal principles of justice. This was the Persian Empire at its height. Not just a military power, but a functioning state, a machine of administration that ran with precision and efficiency. But Darius wanted something more. He wanted a symbol, a capital that would proclaim to the world the glory and permanence of Persia. Pasargadae, Cyrus's capital, was too modest. Susa and Babylon were borrowed cities. Darius needed something new, something uniquely Persian, something that would stand for all time. And so, around 518 BCE, he began construction on the city that would define his reign. He called it Parsa. The Greeks would call it Persepolis, the city of the Persians. It would take 60 years to complete, spanning the reigns of 3 kings. But when it was finished, it was the most magnificent city the world had ever seen. Darius ruled for 36 years, from 522 to 486 BCE. Under his reign, the Persian Empire reached its greatest extent, stretching from the Indus River in the east to the Danube River in the west, from Central Asia in the north to the deserts of Arabia in the south. It was the largest empire in history up to that point. 1 in every 2 human beings alive lived under Persian rule. Darius was not a philosopher king like Cyrus. He was not a warrior like Cambyses. He was an administrator, a builder, a man who understood that empires are not held together by charisma, but by systems. And the system he built worked. For over 2 centuries, the Persian Empire would endure, outlasting dynasties, wars, and invasions. But even great systems have weaknesses. And Darius, for all his genius, made one critical mistake. He tried to expand westward, into Greece. And that decision would set in motion a conflict that would define the next century of Persian history. But before we talk about the wars, we must talk about the city, the jewel of the empire, the place where Darius's vision was made stone. We must talk about Persepolis. Chapter 7. Persepolis, the jewel of the empire. There are cities built for trade, cities built for war, cities built for worship, and then there are cities built for one purpose only, to proclaim the glory of an empire. Persepolis was that kind of city. It was not a place where people lived ordinary lives. It was not a bustling market town or a military fortress. It was a stage, a monument, a declaration carved in stone and raised on a platform above the plain. It was the place where, once a year, the empire came to renew itself. Darius chose the location carefully. The site lay in the heartland of Persis, the ancestral home of the Persian people, nestled against the Kuhe Rahmat mountain. It was defensible, symbolic, and visible for miles. Construction began around 518 BCE and continued for decades, through the reigns of Darius, his son Xerxes, and his grandson Artaxerxes. Thousands of workers were brought from across the empire, stonemasons from Ionia, woodworkers from Babylon, goldsmiths from Egypt, sculptors from every corner of the known world. But they were not slaves. The records, preserved on clay tablets, show that these workers were paid wages, given rations of grain, wine, and meat, and treated with a level of respect unusual for the ancient world. Darius wanted Persepolis to be a symbol of unity, and he understood that monuments built by force carry the stain of cruelty. The city rose on an enormous stone platform, over 40 feet high and covering more than 30 acres. To reach it, visitors climbed a grand staircase, wide enough for 10 horsemen to ride abreast. The stairs were shallow, designed so that nobles could ascend them with dignity, without stumbling. At the top stood the Gate of All Nations, a massive stone gateway flanked by colossal winged bulls with human heads, borrowed from Assyrian tradition but executed with Persian grace. An inscription above the gate read, "I am Xerxes, the great king, king of kings, king of the lands of many peoples, king of this great earth far and wide." Beyond the gate lay the heart of the complex, the Apadana, the audience hall of the great king. The Apadana was breathtaking. Its roof was supported by 72 stone columns, each over 60 feet tall, topped with elaborate capitals carved in the shape of bulls, lions, and eagles. The columns were spaced so that light flooded the hall, creating a sense of openness and majesty. The walls were lined with bas-reliefs, intricate carvings that depicted a procession of delegates from every corner of the empire. There were Medes in rounded caps, Babylonians in long robes, Egyptians carrying ivory, Indians leading exotic animals, Scythians with pointed hats, Greeks bearing gold vessels. 23 different nations, each rendered in careful detail, each bringing tribute to the king. But here's what's remarkable. There are no scenes of war, no battles, no executions, no conquered enemies groveling in chains. Every figure walks calmly, dignified, as if participating in a ceremony, not a subjugation. This was the message Darius wanted to send. The Persian Empire was not built on terror. It was built on cooperation, on the willing participation of diverse peoples united under one rule. Whether that was true or not didn't matter. The image was what mattered. Once a year, during the festival of Nowruz, the Persian New Year, delegates from every satrap would make the journey to Persepolis. They would climb the grand staircase, pass through the gate of all nations, and enter the Apadana, where the great king sat on his throne, elevated above them, surrounded by guards and nobles. Each delegation would present its gifts: gold from Lydia, horses from Media, lapis lazuli from Bactria, incense from Arabia, silk from the eastern frontiers. These were not just tributes. They were proof that the empire still functioned, that loyalty still held, that the system worked. And after the ceremony, there would be feasting. Great banquets held in the halls of Persepolis, with music, wine, and food from across the empire. For a few days, the nobles of 23 nations would eat together, drink together, and remember that they were all subjects of the same king. It was political theatre on the grandest scale. And it worked. Beyond the Apadana stood other structures. The throne hall, even larger, where the king held court. The treasury, where the wealth of the empire was stored in vast underground chambers. The royal palaces, private quarters for the king and his family, decorated with glazed bricks, gold leaf, and cedar beams imported from Lebanon. And everywhere, inscriptions. In Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, the words of the kings echoed, "By the grace of Ahura Mazda, I am king." Ahura Mazda granted me this empire. It was propaganda, yes, but it was also something more. It was a vision of order, of a world where different peoples could coexist under a single rule, where diversity was not a threat, but a strength, where the role of the king was not to conquer, but to protect and unite. For 200 years, Persepolis stood as the symbol of that vision. Kings came and went. Wars were fought and lost. Rebellions flared and were crushed. But every spring, during Nowruz, the empire returned to Persepolis, and for a few days, the dream felt real, until the day it burned. But that is a story for later. For now, Persepolis stands in the sunlight, its columns reaching toward the sky, its staircases filled with delegates from across the world. It is the jewel of the empire, the city of the Persians, the symbol of everything Darius built. And it is beautiful. Chapter 8: The Greco-Persian Wars, when Titans Clashed. For most of the 6th century BCE, Greece was a footnote in Persian history, a collection of small, squabbling city-states on the western edge of the empire, barely worth noticing. Persia was the superpower. Greece was the periphery. But by the end of the century, that would change. And the clash between these two worlds, Persian and Greek, would become one of the defining conflicts of the ancient world. It began, as so many wars do, with a rebellion. The Greek city-states of Ionia, along the coast of Asia Minor, were technically part of the Persian Empire. They had been absorbed when Cyrus conquered Lydia, and they had remained Persian subjects ever since. But they were restless. They resented paying tribute. They resented being ruled by Persian-appointed tyrants. And in 499 BCE, they revolted. The leader of the rebellion was a man named Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus. He sought help from the Greek mainland, and 2 city-states responded. Athens sent 20 ships, and Eretria sent 5. It was not much, but it was enough to turn a local revolt into an international incident. The rebels marched inland and burned Sardis, the old Lydian capital, now a major Persian administrative center. The fire destroyed much of the city, including a temple sacred to the local goddess. When news reached Darius in Susa, he was furious. According to Herodotus, Darius called for his bow. He shot an arrow into the sky and prayed, "Zeus, grant me vengeance on the Athenians." Then he ordered a servant to repeat to him 3 times before every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." Darius did not forget. The Ionian revolt was crushed within 6 years. Miletus was sacked. Its men were killed, its women and children, enslaved. The other rebel cities were punished. The rebellion was over, but Darius's anger was not satisfied. Athens had interfered in imperial affairs. That could not be tolerated. An example had to be made. In 490 BCE, Darius launched a punitive expedition against Greece. It was not meant to conquer the entire peninsula. It was meant to punish Athens and Eretria and to remind the Greeks who the real power in the world was. The Persian fleet, commanded by Darius's generals Datis and Artaphernes, sailed across the Aegean. They landed first at Eretria, which fell after a short siege. The city was burned, its population enslaved, just as Miletus had been. Then the Persians turned toward Athens. They landed at Marathon, a plain on the northeastern coast of Attica, about 26 miles from the city. It was good terrain for cavalry, and the Persians were confident. But the Athenians did not wait to be besieged. They marched out to meet the invaders, led by a general named Miltiades. They were heavily outnumbered, perhaps 10,000 Greeks against 25,000 Persians, but they had one advantage. They were fighting for their homes. The Battle of Marathon, fought in September of 490 BCE, was one of the most shocking upsets in military history. The Athenians formed a phalanx, a dense formation of heavily armored infantry armed with long spears. The Persians, expecting an easy victory, advanced. But the Greeks did something unexpected. They charged. The Greek flanks, reinforced, enveloped the Persian line. The Persian center broke. Their troops fled back to the ships. According to Greek accounts, the Persians lost over 6,000 men. The Athenians lost fewer than 200. It was Persia's first significant military defeat in decades, and the Greeks never forgot it. A runner, tradition says his name was Phidippides, ran the 26 miles back to Athens to announce the victory. He arrived, gasped out the word Nike, meaning victory, and collapsed dead from exhaustion. That run became the inspiration for the modern marathon. For Athens, marathon was a miracle. For Persia, it was an insult. Darius immediately began planning a second, much larger invasion. But in 486 BCE, before he could launch it, he died. The task of avenging Marathon fell to his son, Xerxes I. Xerxes was ambitious, proud, and determined to succeed where his father had been humiliated. He spent 4 years preparing the largest invasion force the ancient world had ever seen. Ancient sources claim he assembled over 2 million soldiers. Modern historians estimate the real number was closer to 200,000. Still an enormous army. Xerxes did not just want to punish Athens. He wanted to conquer all of Greece, to add it to the empire, to prove that Persia was invincible. In 480 BCE, the Persian army began its march. They crossed the Hellespont, the narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, on 2 massive pontoon bridges built by Phoenician engineers. It took 7 days for the entire army to cross. The invasion began well. Most Greek city-states either surrendered or offered tokens of submission. But 2 city-states refused, Athens and Sparta. The first major battle was at Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass in central Greece. A small Greek force, led by the Spartan king Leonidas, held the pass against the Persian army for 3 days. The Battle of Thermopylae has become legendary. 300 Spartans, along with about 7,000 other Greek soldiers, faced the entire Persian host. For 2 days, the Greeks held. The Persians could not break through. Xerxes, furious and desperate, finally found a Greek traitor who showed his troops a secret path around the pass. When Leonidas realized he was about to be surrounded, he dismissed most of the Greek allies. But he and his 300 Spartans stayed. They fought to the last man. Not one surrendered. Not one retreated. It was a defeat, but it became a symbol. A reminder that courage could stand against overwhelming force. That some things were worth dying for. The Persians marched south. Athens was evacuated. Xerxes entered the city and burned it, including the sacred temples on the Acropolis. It was revenge for Sardis. But the war was not over. The Greek fleet, led by the Athenian general Themistocles, lured the Persian navy into the narrow straits of Salamis. There, in September of 480 BCE, the 2 fleets clashed. The Persians had numerical superiority, but in the narrow waters their ships were cramped, unable to maneuver. The Greek triremes, smaller and faster, rammed them again and again. The Persian fleet was destroyed. Xerxes, watching from a throne set up on a hill overlooking the battle, saw his grand invasion collapse. He withdrew back to Asia, leaving part of his army in Greece under his general Mardonius. But the following year, in 479 BCE, at the Battle of Plataea, that army was defeated as well. The invasion was over. Persia had failed. Greece had survived. And the balance of power in the ancient world had shifted, just slightly, but unmistakably, westward. Xerxes returned to Persia, a diminished man. He never campaigned again. The empire remained vast, wealthy, and powerful. But the myth of invincibility was broken, and in the palaces of Persepolis, the whispers had already begun. The whispers that would, over the next century and a half, grow louder and louder. The whispers that empires, no matter how great, do not last forever. Chapter 9. The Long Decline. Shadows of Greatness. After Xerxes, the Persian Empire did not collapse. It simply stopped growing. For over a century and a half, from the mid-5th century to the late 4th century BCE, Persia remained the largest and wealthiest state in the world. Its cities still gleamed. Its roads still stretched across 3 continents. Its treasuries still overflowed with gold. But something essential had been lost. The fire that had driven Cyrus, the organizational genius of Darius, the ambition of Xerxes, all of it dimmed. What remained was maintenance, survival, the slow, inevitable drift from greatness toward mediocrity. Xerxes himself never recovered from the disaster in Greece. He returned to Persepolis and spent his remaining years building palaces and indulging in the pleasures of the court. In 465 BCE, he was assassinated in his bedroom by the commander of his own royal guard, a man named Artabanus, likely acting on behalf of one of Xerxes' sons. The murder sparked a brief struggle for succession, but eventually, another son, Artaxerxes I, took the throne. He ruled for 40 years, from 465 to 424 BCE, and his reign was marked by relative stability. But it was a passive stability, the kind that comes not from strength but from exhaustion. Artaxerxes faced rebellions. Egypt, which had been part of the empire since Cambyses conquered it, revolted in 460 BCE and remained independent for over 50 years. The satraps in Asia Minor grew more autonomous, acting like kings in all but name, and the Greek city-states, emboldened by their victories, continued to meddle in Persian affairs, supporting rebellions and raiding the coast. But Persia adapted. It could not defeat Greece militarily, so it turned to diplomacy and bribery. Persian gold flowed into Greek politics, funding one city-state against another, keeping them divided and weak. It was effective. For decades, Athens and Sparta fought each other in the brutal Peloponnesian War, funded in part by Persian money. The Persians had learned a valuable lesson. You don't need to conquer your enemies if you can simply pay them to destroy each other. After Artaxerxes I came Darius II, then Artaxerxes II, who ruled for an astonishing 46 years, the longest reign of any Achaemenid king. But long reigns do not always mean successful reigns. Artaxerxes II faced a civil war almost immediately. His younger brother, Cyrus the Younger, tried to seize the throne with the help of 10,000 Greek mercenaries. The two armies met at the Battle of Cunaxa in 401 BCE. Cyrus was killed, his rebellion crushed, but the Greek mercenaries fought their way back to Greece, proving that even deep inside the empire, Persian power was not absolute. The story of their retreat, recorded in Xenophon's Anabasis, became famous in Greece. It showed that Persia, for all its size, was vulnerable. Egypt revolted again. This time, it took decades to reconquer. Satraps in Anatolia declared independence and had to be brought back into line by force. The empire was fracturing at the edges, held together not by loyalty or vision, but by bureaucracy and inertia. And then came Artaxerxes III, who ruled from 358 to 338 BCE. He was more ruthless than his predecessors, crushing rebellions with extreme violence. He reconquered Egypt in 343 BCE, executing its leaders and burning its temples. He purged disloyal satraps and centralized power back in the royal court. For a moment, it seemed like the empire might recover, but it was a false recovery, built on fear, not strength. In 338 BCE, Artaxerxes III was poisoned by his own vizier, a eunuch named Bagoas. Bagoas then placed Artaxerxes' youngest son, Arses, on the throne, planning to rule through him. But when Arses tried to assert independence, Bagoas poisoned him too. Finally, Bagoas selected a distant relative of the royal family, a man named Darius, and made him king. This was Darius III, the last king of the Achaemenid dynasty. Darius III was not a fool. He was not incompetent. By all accounts, he was a decent man, brave in battle, loyal to his family. But he had inherited an empire in decline, an empire hollowed out by corruption, weakened by rebellion, and exhausted by centuries of maintaining an impossible size. And just as he took the throne, a new threat appeared on the western horizon. A young king from Macedon, a half-barbaric kingdom on the northern edge of Greece, had just finished conquering the Greek city-states. His father had built the army. He had inherited the ambition. His name was Alexander, and he was coming. Chapter 10. Alexander and the Fall, the End of an Era. In 334 BCE, Alexander III of Macedon crossed the Hellespont with an army of 35,000 men. He was 22 years old. He had been king for just 2 years, and he had decided to do what his father, Philip, had always dreamed of: conquer Persia. To most observers, it seemed absurd. Persia was still the greatest empire on earth. It controlled more territory, more wealth, and more soldiers than Macedon could ever hope to match. Alexander's invasion seemed like the delusion of an arrogant boy, but Alexander was no ordinary boy. The first battle came quickly, at the Granicus River in northwestern Anatolia. Darius III was not present. He had sent his satraps to deal with what he assumed was a minor raid. The Persian forces, confident, lined the opposite bank of the river, waiting for the Macedonians to cross. Alexander charged directly into the river, leading from the front, as he always did. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Alexander himself was nearly killed, his helmet split by a Persian sword. But the Macedonians broke through. The Persian line collapsed. The satraps fled. It was a small battle, but it had enormous consequences. The Greek cities of Ionia, seeing the Persians defeated, opened their gates to Alexander. Within months, the entire western coast of Asia Minor was in Macedonian hands. Darius now realized this was not a raid. This was an invasion. He gathered his forces and marched west to confront the invader personally. The two armies met at Issus, in southern Anatolia, in 333 BCE. Darius commanded a force perhaps twice the size of Alexander's. But size is not everything. Alexander, as always, led the charge. He smashed through the Persian left flank and drove straight toward Darius's position. The Persian king, seeing the Macedonian phalanx bearing down on him, panicked. He turned his chariot and fled. Once the king ran, the army followed. The Battle of Issus became a rout. Darius abandoned his entire camp, including his family, his wife, his mother, his children. They were captured by Alexander, who treated them with surprising courtesy, proof that he had learned the lesson of Cyrus. Mercy could be more effective than cruelty. But the war was not over. Darius retreated east and began gathering another army. He sent letters to Alexander, offering peace, offering gold, offering half the empire. Alexander refused. He wanted it all. For the next 2 years, Alexander marched south, conquering the Phoenician cities, besieging Tyre for 7 months, entering Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator. The Egyptians, who hated Persian rule, crowned him pharaoh. He founded the city of Alexandria, which would become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. But the final confrontation was still to come. In 331 BCE, Darius assembled his last great army on the plains of Gaugamela, near the ancient city of Nineveh in Mesopotamia. He had learned from his previous defeats. He chose flat terrain, perfect for his chariots and cavalry. He armed his forces with longer spears to counter the Macedonian phalanx. He even leveled the ground to make it easier for his scythe chariots, brutal war machines with blades attached to their wheels, to charge. This time, Darius had the advantage. His army outnumbered Alexander's by at least 2-1. The Persian king stood on his chariot, surrounded by his royal guard, confident that this time he would win. But Alexander was a genius of battlefield tactics. He feigned a retreat, drawing the Persian cavalry out of position. Then, with perfect timing, he led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation directly at the gap in the Persian line. And once again, he charged straight for Darius. The Persian king, seeing Alexander coming, watching his guards cut down one by one, made the same decision he had made at Issus. He fled. The army, seeing their king abandon them, broke. The battle became a massacre. Tens of thousands of Persian soldiers died. Darius escaped, fleeing east with a small group of loyal followers. Alexander did not pursue immediately. He marched south to Babylon, which opened its gates without resistance, then to Susa, where he seized the royal treasury, then to Persepolis. At Persepolis, Alexander did something that shocked even his own men. After allowing his soldiers to loot the city, he ordered the entire palace complex burned. Some sources say it was revenge for the Persian destruction of Athens a century and a half earlier. Others say it was an accident. A fire started during a drunken banquet. Still, others suggest it was deliberate, a symbolic act, declaring that the old empire was over. Whatever the reason, Persepolis burned. The columns cracked in the heat. The wooden beams collapsed. The great Apadana, where kings had received delegates from 23 nations, was gutted by flames. The jewel of the Persian Empire was reduced to ash and stone. Darius fled further east, into Bactria, trying to gather support for one final stand. But his own satraps, seeing that the war was lost, turned on him. In 330 BCE, Darius III was stabbed by his own nobles as he fled. They left him dying by the side of the road. When Alexander found him, Darius was already dead. According to legend, Alexander covered the fallen king's body with his own cloak, a gesture of respect. Whether the story is true or not, it carries a symbolic weight. The old empire had fallen. The age of Persia was over. Alexander declared himself king of Asia. He adopted Persian customs, wore Persian dress, and married a Persian noblewoman, Roxana. He tried to blend Macedonian and Persian cultures, creating a hybrid empire. But many of his own men resented this. They had not come to become Persians. They had come to conquer them. Alexander's empire did not last. He died in Babylon in 323 BCE, at the age of 32, possibly from fever, possibly from poison. His empire was divided among his generals, and within a generation, the dream of a unified Greco-Persian world was over. But Persia did not disappear. The Persians survived. A few centuries later, a new dynasty, the Parthians, would rise in the east. After them came the Sassanids, who ruled for 4 centuries and rivaled Rome itself. And even after the Arab conquest brought Islam to Persia, the Persian language, culture, and identity endured. Empires rise and fall, but peoples and ideas last far longer. The Achaemenid Empire lasted for just over 2 centuries, from Cyrus's rise in 550 BCE to Alexander's conquest in 330 BCE. In the span of history, that is not long. Rome lasted longer. China's dynasties lasted longer. But length is not the same as influence. The Persians changed the world. They proved that an empire could be built on tolerance, not terror, that different peoples could live together under one rule without losing their identities, that roads, laws, and administration matter as much as swords. The idea of human rights, enshrined in the Cyrus cylinder, echoed forward through time. The Achaemenid system of satrapies became the model for Roman provinces, Islamic caliphates, and modern federal states. The royal road inspired every highway system that followed. Even the modern postal service owes a debt to Persian messengers. And the story of Persia reminds us that empires, no matter how great, are fragile. They depend on vision, leadership, and the willingness of people to believe in them. When that belief fades, no amount of gold or soldiers can hold them together. Today, Iran, the modern heir to ancient Persia, still remembers. The ruins of Persepolis are a national symbol. Nowruz, the Persian New Year, is still celebrated across the region, and the pride of being Persian, of belonging to a civilization that once ruled the world, has never disappeared. Thank you for traveling with me tonight through the story of ancient Persia. I hope you sleep well and dream of mountain fortresses, endless roads, and kings who believed that truth was the highest law. Until the next journey through history, good night.